Okay, how are we doing? We okay? Good.
Yeah.
Excellent. Excellent. So we're going to be continuing with our learning on themes from Sefer Bereshis. But I'd like to make 2 points before that. Firstly, of course, everybody here, pretty much everybody here in this Shia, had some connection or knew of the late Dayan Chanukh Ehrentreu, passed away on Thursday, and we're in the middle of the Shiva for Dayan Chanukh Ehrentreu, who was the Rosh Bezdin of London for 35 years, and who was before that the Rosh Bezdin of Manchester, and from Gateshead and Sunderland, and who was really one of the rabbinic leaders of Anglo Jewry and even in the whole of Europe in our generation. Passed away at the age of 90, and he left a very, I think, an important legacy, both in terms of the London Beth Din and the standards of halacha, the standards of kashrus and gittin and dinimominus and mikvahs and erevin, all the things he touched, he really managed to the highest level of halacha. And apart from which, maybe many of you are not aware of the fact, but it's actually, I know many dayanim. And the truth is, the role of a dayan in the community is in many ways pretty technical. In other words, he has to deal with, is this mikvah kosher or posel? He has to check it. Is this get kosher or posel? Is this kashrus shchita? He's really a person who's dealing with the details of halacha, and it's rare to have a dayan who is also a leader in the community, who is also standing up and inspiring and commanding a general position of leadership in the Kehillah. But Dayan Ehrentreu was such an individual. He was someone who was able to really inspire a whole generation and lead Klal Yisrael and give speeches and talks and private advice to individuals and to institutions, which was really quite extraordinary. Speaking personally, I was a young rabbi in my early 30s when Dayan Ehrentreu, when I got to know Dayan Ehrentreu in the beginning in the 1980s. And my shul wasn't actually technically part of his remit at all. We weren't part of the United Synagogue or the chief rabbi or anything like that. Our shul was an independent startup shul. Nevertheless, his influence on the building and development of Ner Yisrael community was massive. He was always there behind the scenes, and he was always able to give advice. And I was actually a ben bayis in his house. I came into his house very frequently, and he always welcomed me, and he always had time for me. And in general, I never quite understood how he managed to fit into one day all the things that he did. He had phenomenal energy levels, phenomenal commitment levels, and running the Bezdin and running his community and all the other communities. But for me, he was a very important a rabbi's rabbi. Many of you maybe are not aware, but that Rabbanim also needs to have a Rav. Not only congregants need to have a rabbi, but even rabbis need to have a rabbi to consult with and to help, to give them some inspiration and guidance when they're not quite sure exactly how to proceed. And Dayan Ehrentreu was a most remarkable rabbi's rabbi, and for me personally, for which I'm eternally grateful. And he helped build lots of communities, and he will be indeed he will indeed be sorely missed. So I'd like to dedicate today's shir, in addition to, of course, the dedications of the sponsorship, the family of Lisa, Stemma, and Phil, also to the memory of Dayan Chanukh Ehrentreu, Zeichat Tzadik Livrach. I think Phil and Lisa, you knew him in Manchester already, is that right?
Very well, and he was a patient of mine.
And he was a patient of yours. Okay, so Phil can tell you all about the Dayan Ehrentreu's teeth. I can't tell you about his teeth, personally, but but I can say that you did a good job, Phil. Did a good job.
My parents taught with him and with his father, his late father as well. I've known him, known him since I was born. Yeah.
Is that right? Is that right?
I was in school, in Jewish day school, with Rabbi Hanoch Alav Shalom's father.
Really? Wow. So you can see that we've got lots and lots of connections to this great man, and we've all benefited in so many ways from his inspiration and his influence and his halachic and hashkafic guidance, and truly remarkable. At the same time, he was remarkably, had a human touch. He was able to, I'd like to tell maybe, I don't know if did any of you see the little video I put out on Friday? I put out a little video of a Hesped. Did you see that? For those of you who haven't seen it yet, you must go onto YouTube and look up Rabbi Kimche, and you'll see this. It's just a 10-minute video, a bit of a Hesped. But I've got hundreds of stories of his. Maybe I'll just share with you one little story, which I think is inspirational, and that is a story I heard from him firsthand. And it happened while he was the Rosh Bezdin of Manchester. And he said one day the Bezdin got a phone call from the prison, the local security prison, and they said, look, we've got this Israeli woman here who's serving out a sentence for drug smuggling, and she's driving us crazy that she wants a rabbi. She must see a rabbi. And so we rang up the Bezdin, we looked up in the phone book, and you're the rabbis of Manchester. Maybe you can help us out. Anyhow, so Dan Anstra, he could have sent one of the junior rabbonim out to see what's going on, but typical of him was he was very hands-on. He decided he took one of his junior rabbonim associates with him, and he went to the prison, and he met this Israeli woman who was indeed had been convicted of a drug smuggling crime, a completely non-religious Israeli woman, but she was pregnant. Father unknown. She was pregnant, and she'd been told that it was a boy, and she was very concerned that he should have a bris milah. That was the reason why she was shouting for a rabbi. I need a rabbi. I need a bris milah. So Dayan Shai, as you probably all know, in addition to being a Rosh Bezdin and lots of other things, was also a moyel. He also did bris milas himself. In fact, he did two of my boys. So he said, "Look, I'll look after this. I'll do. Don't worry. I'll make sure this happens." Spoke to her a little bit, but typically, Dayan Shai is not just a halachic man. He also was a man of amazing levels of chesed. So he basically took on this woman as a chesed case. And he made sure there was a woman from the community who went to visit her in prison. And Rebbetzin Ruchi, Yibodeh L'chaim Tevim, when she bakes challahs for Shabbos, in addition to the challahs she needs for her own family, she bakes a couple of dozen little tiny challahs, about 6 inches long challahs, which are then sent out to all sorts of people who need a bit of the chizuk. So Bekitzer, Dayan made sure that this woman in prison received, most Friday afternoons, she received one of Rebbetzin Ruchi Ehrentreu's challahs before Shabbos. Anyhow, the day came, and and he did the bris milah. And at the bris milah, he said, "Nubi Koresh Shemo Yisrael. What name do you want to call the child?" So she said, "I haven't thought about it. What name do you suggest?" So on the spot, Dayan Shai. So he was probably, I think it was Parshas Nosai. The Haftarah was about Shimshon HaGibor. So he said, Shimshon is a good name, Shimshon. And the Israelis know the name Shimshon. Shimshon HaGibor is a familiar name. Okay, they called the kid Shimshon. Anyhow, the woman served out her sentence, of a couple of years of her sentence, and returned to Israel, and they lost touch. Fast forward about 25 years, he's in his house at Hendon, and he gets a knock on the door. And there's a frum woman standing there with a tichel on, and a big, strong young man standing next to her with a big kippah asruga, and his tzitzis out. And she says, Dinandra, do you remember me? He says, no, I don't remember you at all. She said, let me give you a hint. This young man's name is Shimshon. And I want to tell you, he's the joy of my life. And before he got married, he said to me he wants to come and meet the man who gave him his name. And here was Diana Troy, who was called into the prison to do a bris milah, but actually basically adopted this woman and her child, gave them a chizuk, gave them an identity, gave them strength. And because of that, there's a whole new Jewish family. She said he's a captain in the Israeli army, and he's a wonderful young man. And she said, you know that in the prison they were trying to convince me to abort this child at the time. I was a prisoner, in a security prison, and with no father and nothing. And they were trying to convince me to abort. But I said to them, this is the woman speaking. She said, I said to them, I've made enough mistakes in my life. I'm not going to make this mistake as well. I'm keeping this baby. And you helped me. You gave him a name. You gave me a bris. And in telling the story, Diana, I said, it was probably my wife's chalas that did the trick. That's how he explained the success of this particular story. It was probably my wife's chalas that really made this happen. But I just found this it's a small anecdote, maybe not a world-changing anecdote, but it's an example about a man who is involved in running a beis din, but still remembers the plight of people in difficulty and engages in chesed at lots of different levels. And that is truly extraordinary. And I've got dozens of other stories. Maybe as time goes on, I'll tell you many more stories about him. I was pretty much in his house almost every day. And maybe at another occasion, I'll tell you some more about him. But that's what I wanted to mention today, because we're in the middle of the Shiva, and we should all spare a thought for the loss of a great man. Okay, that's the first point I wanted to mention. The second point I wanted to mention, and this is a quiz question for everybody here at the Shia. Today is the 29th of November. Why is that special?
Kaftet November is when the
November.
Nations,
What do you say?
Kaftet November is when the UN agreed to Israel coming into existence. They had the vote.
Right. That's right. We know about the Independence Day in 1948 when Israel was born, but 1948 couldn't have happened without the 29th of November 1947. The 29th of November 1947 was 75 years ago, where the United Nations voted to create a Jewish state in the land of Israel, the partition plan. And you should know, Jews worldwide were out in the street dancing and singing and celebrating. 29th of November, 75 years ago, was a national yontif. And there are many cities in Israel that have a street, if I'm not mistaken. There's a street called Kaftet November. Is that right? I mean, I think I've seen one or two streets. Kaftet November. Then it's the only English date in the calendar.
Yeah.
Which is there one in Catalan?
Catalan.
That's probably where I've seen it, Kaftet November. But I've seen it, I think it exists in other towns as well, because the 29th of November was really a turning point in the history of Am Yisrael. And so on the one hand, it was a political success and an extremely important political moment. On the other hand, from our point of view, it was certainly the Yad Hashem. There's no question on 29th of November, 75 years ago, we should see there the Yad Hashem, the hand of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And I always felt that was a moment where HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave the Jewish people a little hug following the Holocaust, a little hug to revive. The Jewish people were really revived 2 years after the Holocaust ended. This 29th of November was a moment of a spirit revival of the spirit of the Jewish people worldwide. There's going to be a Jewish state in the land of Israel, the dream of thousands of years, and the international community have signed on the dotted line that this is going to happen, is the most remarkable moment in the lives of anybody who was alive at that time. This was a game changer for the Jewish identity and for Jewish people worldwide. So today, Rabbi said, the 29th of November, you should drink a l'chaim, drink an extra l'chaim to celebrate the day. One shouldn't go, and to realize that it is to realize the Yad Hashem involved. They say it was the first time ever in the United Nations, and maybe the first time for a long time, that Russia and America both voted yes together in the United Nations voting. It never happened. You know, the United Nations, that America and Russia both voted yes, and it was a shock. And they each voted for their own reasons and for their own calculations, but really it was the hand of HaKadosh Baruch Hu operating behind the scenes to make this work. Of course, it goes without saying that as the Jewish people celebrated and said yes and grasped it with both hands, all the Arab nations and Arab organizations, bar none, they all rejected it. They all said, if the price we have to pay for accepting an Arab nation is that we acknowledge a Jewish nation, we're not going to accept it. And that began the long tradition to this very day of the Arab nations refusing all and every peace settlement, because by doing so, they would have to acknowledge the existence of a Jewish state. And that's, but it was a very important turning point in Jewish history, a moment to remember, a moment to reflect on, and see the hand of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in it. In general, since we're coming up to Hanukkah, maybe I'll just mention that the whole point of Hanukkah, in a certain sense, is that Chazal wanted us to be able to see the hand of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in military and political events. One could read the whole story of Hanukkah as simply a remarkable political military victory of Yehuda Maccabee and his followers, enabling them to remove the Assyrian Greeks out of the land of Israel and establish Jewish sovereignty. If you wanted to, you could see it simply, and indeed, sadly, in the Israeli secular world, Hanukkah is celebrated as a Chag HaGvura, as a Yontov of Jewish military prowess, right? That's how it's celebrated. But actually, Chazal said, no, the way to celebrate Hanukkah is to light a menorah. And the menorah is the or, the light from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the light from the Beis HaMikdash. And this military political success of Yehuda Maccabee represented a gift from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to give the Jewish people the gift of Jewish sovereignty in the land of Israel. They hadn't had Jewish sovereignty in the land of Israel for about 250 years since the destruction of the first temple. Because don't forget, they built the second temple under the kind permission of the empire of first of Persia and then of Greece. They were living under foreign rule. There was a Beis HaMikdash, a second temple, but there was no sovereignty. And Hanukkah was the Yontov of sovereignty, of Jewish sovereignty in the land of Israel, and that the Jews were once again balabatim in the land of Israel. This hadn't happened for centuries. And that was the great military national victory, but we don't make a military celebration out of it. We make a Yontov out of it, and we recognize the nace. And I've always felt there's a bit of a connection between Kaftet B'November and Hanukkah. But in actual fact, Kaftet B'November also, you could see it as a success for the political lobbying and whatever it was that brought it about, that decision in the United Nations. But actually, it was a gift from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And indeed, when we light the menorah, it's interesting to see this. When we light the menorah, we make two brachas, right? One is the Hadlik Ner Shel Hanukkah, which is the physical side of what we're doing. We're striking a match and lighting a flame and igniting the ner, and that is an act that takes place in the world of physical cause and effect. But then we make a second bracha. And the second bracha is what's important. The second bracha is she'asa nisim la'avoseinu vayomim aheim bazman hazeh. That what happened at Hanukkah was a nace. A nace, not that it wasn't a supernatural nace. There was no splitting of the Red Sea, but it was a nace that the hand of HaKadosh Baruch Hu enabled us to once again regain sovereignty in the land of Israel and to remove the persecution of the Hellenists and enable us to live a Jewish life in the land of Israel. That was a nace. And of course, the word Bizman Hazeh in that bracha has a beautiful ambiguity to it. On one level, Bayomim Mahei Bazman Hazeh means in those days, on this date. That's what it simply means. On this date, a couple of 2,500 years ago, on this date, we saw the miracle of Yehuda Maccabee. But it also means Bayomim Mahei Bazman Hazeh means like we saw those Nisim Bayomim Mahei, we see them also Bazman Hazeh. But you also in our lifetime, we've seen these nisim, but you have to have the eyes to see it. You need special eyes to see the nace. And it's always like that. With all miracles of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, there's one half of the event is that the miracle took place. The other half is that we need to have the ability to see the nace, to see the hand of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because it's so easy not to see it. So we make two brachas. Yes, we're lighting a flame, and for that we need fire, and we need candles, we need oil, we need the physical wherewithal to fight the battles. But then we also make a second bracha, that this was not won by military genius alone. It was won because it was the Yad Hashem and a gift from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in the same way as our generation 75 years ago got this gift from HaKadosh Baruch Hu of Medinat Yisrael, the greatest gift he's given us in our generation. So this is it. Food for thought for the 29th of November, something truly remarkable. Moving on to our topic for our shir on a Tuesday morning. I'd also like to learn a little bit. We were really looking at the two different versions of the creation of Adam and Chava. And this is a phenomenally interesting topic. So let me first just tell you what Rashi says, right? So Rashi, because I can't give you, I haven't got the text on the screen, but Rashi says in the very beginning, so the first account of the creation of mankind is in Bereshis chapter 1, and the second is in Bereshis chapter 2. So Bereshis chapter 1, when Kadosh Baruch Hu creates Adam, when he creates Adam and Chava on day 6, on the days of creation, so there we're giving a very brief account, right? We're given a brief account of how things were created. Says Rashi, in chapter 1, we're simply being told that Adam and Chava were created on the 6th day. The Torah doesn't go into detail about how the creation took place. But it's detailed somewhere else. Where is the somewhere else? In chapter 2. So in actual fact, Adam and Chava are created on day 1, but there are several very interesting differences between the way in which man is created on day 1 and the way he's created on day 2. Because on day 1, for example, male and female were created together. Right? Zachar u'nekeva bara'am. They're created together on par with each other. They're full partners with each other. They're full partners, right? And this is very fascinating. This is very fascinating. It gives rise to all sorts of interesting midrashic interpretations that maybe in the beginning, for one moment, Adam and Eve were created together in one being, the Medrash says. Maybe what we, as a hermaphrodite, right? The Goyish term for an organism that has both male and female in one organism is a hermaphrodite. For those who've had, like me, had to learn Greek mythology, you will know that a hermaphrodite was a combination of Hermes and Aphrodite. Hermes was the male mythological god, and Aphrodite was the female mythological god, and they gave birth to a child who was a hermaphrodite, was actually had both male and female elements in one being. So there is this very strange concept of a hermaphrodite. But Chazal actually say, if you look at the pasuk, that there was a moment in the beginning where man and woman were created as one being, and then HaKadosh Baruch Hu split them into two beings. But actually, they were on par with each other. If we read chapter 1, man and woman are Zocha u'Nekeva b'Ra'am, he created them together in the same moment. And what's interesting is, and also in chapter 1, there is no mention of the way in which of HaKadosh Baruch Hu implanting a spiritual neshama into the human being. That only comes about in chapter. I seem to remember that's where we left off last time. We were looking at the pasuk by Yipach ba'apov nishmas chayim. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu breathed, so to speak. He breathed a neshama. In fact, the word neshama comes from the word neshima, which is a breath. The breath of God, so to speak, the metaphor of the breath of God was given into man and woman, into Adam and Chava. So in chapter 1, it's given into both of them at the same time. In chapter 2, man, the male man is created alone. He's created alone. If you remember the story. And then the pasuk says, "Lo toiv heyos ha'adam levada," that the human being is not created to live alone. It's a very interesting pasuk. That it's in fact the only time in the whole of the Bria about which the Torah says the word "lo toiv." Repeatedly, the Torah says, "Vayar Elokim ki toiv." This was created. Vayar Elokim ki toiv. God saw that it was good, then he saw something else was good, then he saw something else was good. But there's only one time it says lo toiv, and that is lo toiv heyos ha'adam levad. It's not good for a man to live alone. From the creation, from the moment of creation, the human being is hardwired to live in a relationship, and that's part of the message, really, of the Torah in Bereshit chapter 2. In Bereshit chapter 1, this doesn't exist. In Bereshit chapter 1, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is simply creating the forces of nature, right? The solar system, the sea, the oceans, the animals, etc. Creates man and woman, and they are part of the creation. In chapter 2, we get a different story. We get the story of a human being who is sensitive to a relationship. That's point number 1. The second point is the human being in chapter 2 is sensitive to a different way of understanding God, because in the first chapter it's only Elokim, it's only the name God Elokim. In the second chapter it's Hashem Elokim, Yud Kei Vav Kei, and Yud Kei Vav Kei merely relates to the spiritual dimension in this world, to be sensitive to ruchnius, to spirituality. Everybody has the capacity to be sensitive to the spiritual nature of this world. Not everybody develops that capacity properly, right? But and that comes back a bit to what I was saying before, the ability to see a physical event, a military victory, and to realize the Yad Hashem behind it, to appreciate the Yad Hashem, and to be able to say Nisim La'avaseinu, and to say Hallel, and to recognize this isn't a time to celebrate the military generals. It's a time to celebrate the hand of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Chazdei Hashem. To be able to see that was only really in chapter 2. Chapter 2, he was able to see Yud Kei Vav Kei the spiritual presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in this world. This was that's the second point. Also in chapter, what also interesting in chapter 2 is that the man is looking for a partner. Eventually, HaKadosh Baruch Hu puts him to sleep and takes part of the man and creates it into the woman. This account of the creation is very powerful, extremely powerful. And it's meant to express the idea that in actual fact, man and woman are really like one, but they are two separate entities. And the Torah uses here a very interesting metaphor, which all married men will recognize straight away, and married women for that matter, is the idea of the woman being an Ezer Kenegda. The Torah uses this. If I had the text here, I'd show you a bit more in detail. It's probably one of the most profound and fascinating definitions of a marital relationship, the Ezer Kenegdo. Because in actual fact, in Hebrew language, Ezer and Kenegdo are two opposite descriptions. An Ezer means an assistant and somebody who helps him do what he needs to do, who helps him in life, right? On the other hand, Kenegdo means opposition. Opposition means to oppose it, right? So the help, the assistance, and the opposition, the blending of the two together is a very, very interesting and thought-provoking definition within the marital relationship. And a fair amount has been written about this. But generally speaking, the idea is that the relationship between a husband and wife is such, of course, there's so many different levels to it, but the relationship is that on the one hand, there is the level of the Ezer, that they're both united together in the same project of running the home, running the family, helping each other, doing it together. But there's also the Kenegda, that it's valid to oppose one another when you believe that the other person's doing something wrong, in order to correct mistakes being made by one another. Because the great problem of being alone is you always think you're right, because you've got no one to tell you that maybe you're not right. What you need is somebody who you trust, somebody who loves you, somebody who's not attacking you out of hostility and anger, but someone who is telling you, you know what, you're making a mistake. You must do it differently, right? You must be doing more of this and less of that. And to do it with love and with care, that is the Ezer, that's the Kenegdo part. Right? The Ezer is the assistance, and the Kenegdo is to get, and here's an interesting new twist in the English language. When I was young, they used to call it criticism. Now they call it feedback. You don't anymore. Isn't that right, Phil? You don't ever give somebody criticism. You never give anybody criticism anymore. You only give them feedback, right? So feedback, of course, means criticism. That's what you're doing. You're giving them criticism. But we don't say criticism, right? It's lo na'im to say criticism. You're not. It's not friendly. So you're giving feedback, but actually this comes from the Torah. The Ezer Kenegdo means a husband and wife give each other feedback, meaning really loving criticism, right? The ability to do the two together is what the Torah means by Ezer Kenegdo. The Ezer Kenegdo principle is, I once got into trouble. I remember when I was teaching this in Ner Yisrael many, many years ago. It wasn't exactly this, but a related subject, and I spoke about the Pope. I made a slightly humorous joke, which didn't go down so enormously well. That I said, you know, in the Christian theology, there is the doctrine of the infallibility of the Pope. The Pope can't be wrong. That's what they believe. The infallibility of the Pope. You can look it up. The infallibility of the Pope. You know, trust me, there's no such thing as the infallibility of rabbis. I promise you. There is no corresponding idea of the infallibility of rabbis, right? And in fact, in the Torah, in many places, it speaks about what happens if a Rav or even the whole Sanhedrin give a ruling, and it turns out they were wrong. There's a special korban they have to bring. In other words, the Torah is very clear about the fallibility of even the highest body of Torah knowledge and the greatest leaders, that they can make a mistake. And when they make a mistake, guess what they've got to do? They've got to say, oops, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. I'll try and get it right next time, and let me make amends. I understand, Shirley, you've got to go. It's okay. All the best. So the making of a mistake. So I said about the Pope. There's the doctrine of infallibility. So I said about, do you know why the Pope thinks he's infallible? Right? And the answer is because he doesn't have a wife to tell him that he's made a mistake. That's why he's infallible. Right? The infallibility of the Pope. That particular joke didn't go down so well with everybody in the audience at the time. I thought I was having a go at another religion, but I was just telling a matter of fact, right? The Pope, of course, is not married. He doesn't have a wife, and because he doesn't have a wife, he thinks he's always right. And this idea is hardwired into the text of the Chumash in chapter 2 when he's created Ezer connector. What's also interesting is that in the second account, he's given a neshama more clearly than in the first account. And then he's given a mitzvah. He's given a mitzvah. He's put in Gan Eden, and he's told you can eat from everything, just not from the Eitz Hadas. So we find a much more detailed account in chapter 2. One thing I wanted to share with you, I mentioned it at the end of the last shir, was that Rav Yoshe Ber Soloveitchik in 1965 gave a landmark lecture, which later on he wrote up in English called The Lonely Man of Faith. It was later on translated into Hebrew, a book called the Ish HaEmunah, the Man of Faith, but in English it's called The Lonely Man of Faith. And in it he speaks about the idea that in chapter 1 and chapter 2, what we're getting is two different, two sides of the human personality. There isn't a contradiction between chapter 1 and chapter 2, because there's what he calls Adam 1 and Adam 2. That's his language. Adam 1 was created in chapter 1. Adam 2 is created in chapter 2. But every human being has elements of both 1 and 2 in him and her. Every human being has both. And he has the most remarkable descriptions of Adam 1 and Adam 2 and in human life. In particular, what he was trying to do was to create a certain type of terminology and understanding for how to live a religious life in the modern world. This talk was given in the 1960s, when modern orthodoxy in America was just really in its infancy, and Yoshe Ber Soloveitchik was the guiding light in the creation of a type of modern orthodoxy in America and worldwide. And he says that actually Adam 1 is the drive that the human being has to dominate the world, because that's what's written in chapter 1, right? The kivshuha, dominate. Adam was created together with his wife, and together they have to dominate the world. What does dominate the world mean? He has to control his environment. He has to build buildings. He has to invent new inventions. He has to be a scientist. He has to be a financier. He has to build society and build up the infrastructure of civilization. That's all Adam 1. And these are tremendous achievements, right? The achievements of science, the achievements of finance, the achievements of architects, everybody who is in the process of creating and building and strengthening the world and strengthening civilization and writing and being both the political and military leaders of our generation. All that is Adam 1. But, and that's the beauty of this particular speech of his. If you can, I recommend to you to get a hold of a copy of The Lonely Man of Faith by Rabbi Yoshe Ber Soloveitch. It's a short book. But then he says Adam too is the other side of the coin. Adam too is created alone. And alone he stands before HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And alone he experiences spiritual understanding, spiritual closeness from God to God, and equally spiritual distance from God. Alone he is really an Ish HaEmunah. He's born alone and he dies alone. And he has another aspect of his personality, which is alone, which is not part of society, not even part of a marriage, not even part of a family. It's just the uniqueness of the neshama. The neshama has to meet HaKadosh Baruch Hu in tefillah, in machshava, in Talmud Torah, to delve into the spiritual nature of the world alone and to come by oneself. Of course, when you're alone, you seek out also the company of others who share your spiritual vision, who share your... So in actual fact, the community, he's got a whole piece there. The community built by Adam 1 are a community of people who work together, they're partners in building the world. So Adam 1 can't do it by himself. He needs partners. He needs funders, he needs assistants, he needs architects, he needs planners. He needs to get people together, all in order for the purpose of building. Adam 2, meaning the other dimension of the human being, the neshama of the human being, also needs a society. And his society he needs in order to be able to daven together and learn together and sing together and reflect on the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu together. But actually, all that is done ultimately by the human being as an individual by themselves. That's why Adam 2 is created alone. Because Vayipach Ba'apav Nishmas Chaim is, in a sense, the aloneness of an individual in our spiritual destiny and in our spiritual quest. Everybody has their own unique spiritual quest, which could be different from your husband, from your wife, from your children. That's your neshama. The neshama of each person is totally unique and is not part of society or part of a marriage or part of a family. It's totally unique. And that neshama needs to be nurtured and fed and developed and expressed. And at the same time, there is Adam 1, who's got a family, who's got a society, who's got a bank account, who's got a project, who's building, and how to combine together in one individual, both Adam 1 and Adam 2. That's the subject of his talk. That is really the challenges, particularly of the modern world, where suddenly Orthodox Jews have so many opportunities to be builders, to be financiers, to be academics, to be writers, to be scientists, to be doctors, and all those activities are all the activities of the human being who is being asked to dominate the world. There's a certain majesty and a certain dignity in dominating the world and changing the world and forming the world, but all that is part of only half of the human essence. The other half is not at all interested either in the finance or in the building or in the inventions or in the technology. He wants to feel that his life is close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He wants to be able to daven and to meditate and to connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu at the deepest level through his neshama. And how does one really bring these two? And of course, Adam 2 is not really motivated at all by self-interest. Adam 1 is motivated by self-interest. He wants a better world. He wants a bigger bank account. He wants more fame and more power and more knowledge and more inventions and more technology. And he's motivated by self-interest. Adam 2 has switched off completely his self-interest pattern. He's completely only interested in transcendence. He's interested in connecting with the Ein Sof. He's interested in connecting with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu puts him in Gan Eden. Adam too is put into Gan Eden. And in Gan Eden, he can connect with HaKadosh Baruch Hu totally, using his neshama that he was given, right? And then he's told, but even in Gan Eden, you've got to beware. There is something called the Eitz Hadas. Maybe, hopefully, next year, we'll have a closer look at a deeper understanding of what was this forbidden fruit and what was it all about. But it's very interesting that actually Adam 1 is not really concerned with forbidden fruit. Adam 1, the problem Adam 1 has is that he can be completely drowning in his building projects. He could be so busy building a business and building a family and building a community and building a bank account and building wealth and power and politics that he loses his neshama. Adam too is completely focused on his neshama. He has a problem that he can be so focused on his neshama that he forgets to build a family and to build a world and to build the buildings and to be effective in this world. He can be completely only connected to the spiritual world and disconnected completely from this worldly goals because he's not interested in his self-interest at all. He's completely interested in bitul hayesh, where the Hasidim go bitul hayesh. He's mevatel himself. He completely negates his own ego and his own interests in light of his connection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And this, says Rav Soloveitchik, is a very interesting modern way to read the Chumash. That chapter 1 and chapter 2 are certainly not in any way contradictory descriptions of the creation of man. On the contrary, they are complementary descriptions. They work together. And that what the Torah is telling us is that you, the human being, man and woman, you have got really two different aspects of your personality. Is the go-getter personality to achieve, and that's important to build a world and build a family and build a community. And then there is the other side, which has nothing to do with building and nothing to do with achievement. It's got to do with connecting to Ruchnius, connecting to a spiritual force in this world, connecting to the Or Ein Sof, right? So in a sense, when you make your brachas on Hanukkah, so when you're making the first bracha, Lahadlik Ner Shel Hanukkah, that is really a bracha made by Adam 1. Adam 1 is lighting fires. He knows how to create flames, how to create fire, how to change the world, how to ignite all sorts of different processes in this world to make the world a better place and switch on the light. But the second bracha is already Adam 2. And the second bracha is Sha'osa Nisim Lavoseinu B'Yom Ha'hem B'Zman Hazeh. Forget Yehuda Maccabi and his merry men and his army and his military victories. I forget all that. What's important is to see the Yad Hashem. I want to tell you the same is true very much here in Israel. I'm sure you've seen it and heard it and read it many times. You know, whenever Israel has a major military victory, Baruch Hashem, we've been blessed with several military victories since the creation of the state. Each time you'll read the secular press speaking about the absolute incredible genius of Israeli technology and Israeli military intelligence and the strategy of the generals. And then you got to realize that actually they're missing the point. The point is that from the very beginning, the whole of Medinat Yisrael is a nace. And the nace started on the Kaftet November 75 years ago. That's when the nace began. And it's been a complete miracle ever since. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense that we can survive in the country where we survive. It doesn't make sense that this country should be booming and developing, Baruch Hashem, Chazdei Hashem, the way it does. It just doesn't make sense. And yet, it is really the story of our generation. That this is really Sha'asa Nisim Lavoseinu. When you say that bracha, you have to think about Medinat Yisrael in 2022. It's really Sha'asa Nisim B'Yamim Ha'hem B'Zman Hazeh. That even in our times, we're able to see the hand of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that's the challenge. So Adam too is able to see the Yad Hashem. If things are going well, so Adam too understands that this is a gift from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. If things are going difficult, Adam too understands that this is a nisayim, that God is testing him. Whether it's going right or going wrong, it's all miyad Hashem. The hand of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is working behind the scenes all the time. Adam too can see this clearly. The neshama can see this clearly. Adam 1 often can't see this at all because he's too busy involved in the mechanics of dominating the world and creating new inventions and new businesses and new activities. He's a man of action. Adam 1 is a man of action. Adam 2 is a man of reflection, a man of thought, a man of spiritual inspiration. And this is really the, coming back to where I started from, along this theme, our great and much beloved Dayan Chanoch Ehrentreu was also a man of action and also a man of ruchnius. And the way he combined these two together was truly remarkable. He had incredible energy and he was always on the move, and he created lots of very important aspects of the Jewish community, including indeed my community. The Ner Yisrael owes an enormous debt of gratitude to him, as indeed I do. But at the same time, he was also a man of ruchnius. He was able to connect with Yiras Shamayim and Emunah and share that and to inspire a whole generation. And that's it for today, ladies and gentlemen. So don't forget today 3 things. First of all, Kaftet November. Secondly, spare a thought for Dayan Ehrentreu. And thirdly, every human being has got Adam 1 and Adam 2, 2 sides to the personality. And they need to be somehow in sync with each other and not let one side dominate over the other. And that is really the message of Bereshis chapter 1 and chapter 2. I'm sorry we haven't got any text for you today. Please God, I don't know what happened. Not sure exactly what happened with my computer, but we'll sort it out. That's it, Dina. That's it for today.
Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
thank you.
Amazing, beautiful. Thank you. Even
Lovely to
without
see you.
three.
Thank you very much. Lovely to
Brilliant.
see
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you very
Great
much.
pleasure. Great
Lisa.
pleasure. Yeah, and
Thank you
Michael,
very much.
Phil and Lisa, always lovely to see you. Thank you very much.
Thank
Well, to
you.
all of you. And please God, next week we'll get together again.
Thank you.